Hello, Hushi here, and I'm doing another extemporaneous version of Hushi Talks. Today I'm talking about the old, but not really that old, because if it were that old, then I would be old, and maybe I am old. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I am here to talk about the now quite vintage program Hammer House of Horror. I remember this was done really when Hammer, the film studio, were in kind of bad shape, to put it mildly. Even though Hammer films were basically a staple of my youth, and before then they were much more popular. I was a weird kid. The films had fallen in popularity, and they had eschewed their typical wheelhouse, bailiwick, as it were, of doing period pieces and gothic horror. They modernized a lot of theirs and did some different things. And I have to say that some of the different things were really bold moves that I feel worked extremely well, whereas others were just kind of either too ambitious or really boring in the same way that a lot of contemporary films of their time were really boring. One of the best films that I feel they ever did was Vampire Circus, and a lot of that is because it went away from a lot of the convention in vampire stories and their own vampire films especially. It was still a period piece which I feel Hammer always excelled in. Modernizing things didn't really work well for them, and it felt like they were trying to outdo Amicus, which was probably their most prominent and well-known rival of the time, which tended to do more modern fare. But Hammer House of Horror is, in a word, horrible. It is an absolutely asinine chore to get through. It's awful. Almost all of the episodes are either so boring as to be completely the anathema to building any sort of suspense or horror, so predictable to the level where there's no horror because you know exactly what's going to happen, or so stupid that they are frustrating beyond belief, which is not horror, it's just annoyance. There were a couple of moments in the series that I can remember that were generally a bit better, but overall most of the episodes end in extremely unsatisfying ways, which is not horror, or they just have no purpose or point. Like, I will admit, I did not rewatch the entire series, but I have seen the whole series in past. In fact, the series was so disreputable that Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, hosted a series of videos that were just the episodes of Hammer House of Horror hosted by her. And in them, she tended to point out a lot of the very obvious problems with the writing, which was usually played for shocks, but wasn't shocking. It was just stupid. One of the first experiences I had with the entire series was one of the episodes that actually features Peter Cushing, one of their most frequently appearing and great actors in the movies. And I believe it was called The Silent Scream. And he played this former Nazi who loved to experiment on people with traps and things like that. And the protagonist was this reformed thief who was going through a rehabilitative sort of job under Cushing's character. And of course Peter Cushing played the character brilliantly, as he always does. But the resolution was that the protagonist escaped from him, he died, and then the protagonist and his wife, girlfriend, I forget, find themselves in their kitchen next to a highway in their house, and there's a message that he has wired it up with electricity so they won't be able to escape the kitchen, and of course they can't do anything because now the guy is dead and he can't turn off his trap. But see, here's the thing. They're not only right beside the highway, even though it might drown out their screams, someone eventually will probably figure out something's wrong, especially if they break the very obvious window. Even if the window is wired for power, and you can't crawl through it, but you might be able to jump through it, just throw something in the room through the window. Someone's gonna notice. Just keep throwing shit. But even if you didn't want to do that, even if you were not sure you'd be able to make it out, here's an idea. Just wait for them to turn the power off. It's going to happen sooner or later, especially considering he wired the fucking house with electricity enough to kill a person. That's not cheap. And you better believe these power companies will come and investigate something like that. In fact, Elvira pointed that out. Just wait for the power to be turned off. Then just walk out. You might have to shit in the sink a couple of times, but you know what? better than dying, and a lot better than panicking for a very easily resolved situation, which a lot of these are. It's either a very easily resolved situation that is so simple and facile as to be insulting, and the episodes are like an hour long, so that's an hour of your life that you've wasted on these stupid resolutions, most of which you will have seen coming from at least a country mile away. There's another one where this man is just unbelievably paranoid, and it does do a fairly effective job of drawing you into the man's paranoia, but nothing really comes of it. We never really find out if he really was paranoid for a reason, or if it was all just him being crazy. The ending doesn't really resolve that, and everything else is just like, ooh, it's creepy imagery. How creepy and terrifying, except it's not, because we don't know what the fuck is actually going on. Really, the only one that I remember fairly well, aside from, there was one with Pierce Brosnan, I believe, which had a character that I believe was supposed to be gay and a drag queen, presented fairly well, especially considering the period of time in which the show was made. But that was basically it. And the only other episode that I feel like had anything in it worth watching was the very first, which is called Witching Time, I believe. And it featured Patricia Quinn of Rocky Horror fame and Life of Brian and Lords of Salem, so forth. She's always a joy to see in everything, and she plays this witch named Lucinda Jessup, who has apparently used magic to shoot herself forward in history and avoid the witch-finders. And it's an interesting examination of how someone from an earlier time might try and adapt to our modern life. However, unfortunately, it's also not a very well-written story, so you get the main character, who is basically a basket case from moment one, his wife, who is a total piece of shit, and really a giant asshole, and she's cheating on him with this doctor who does not care about her, and cares even less about him, despite trying to present himself as a friend who is worthy of a confidence and keeping a confidence. So from the get-go, it's just awful. But Patricia Quinn's witch actually makes it much more watchable and much more interesting, not the least reason of which is because we are basically cheering for her, although her choice in men is very poor, because this... No insult intended to the actor, but he really does look completely washed out, completely just strung out, horrible, psychotic, hasn't slept for days. Like, either the makeup was really good or he was going off on like benders the whole time, because he looks just haggard. Like, I don't know why anyone from the past put in our present day would look at a man like that and be like, yes, I want that man for myself. It is absolutely right. But the thing is, she understands that his wife is unfaithful and all these other things. Apparently the sex with her is really great too and very emphatic, so there's really no reason for him to resist her. But he does anyway. And like, his wife comes over and she's got all these pains and she's gone through all this terrible stuff and everything. And it's supposed to be like for the witch's poppet. You know, this is also the best moment in the entire series, where Lucinda has just gone crazy with this woman's lipstick in this dude's bedroom that apparently he occasionally shares with his wife because she's got lipstick there and so forth. She has written on the door her name and the wife's name and scrubbed it out, like crossed it out with lipstick. Then she made an altar off of a mantle above like a fireplace. Put this poppet on it with nails stuck in it, which correspond to the pains that this woman is still having, which we're supposed to believe is weird. I don't think it's weird to have lingering pain after your horse collapses with you under it, and you've only been away for like 3 days. I think that it's probably decent to expect that you will have pain for some time. Hilariously, there is also a nun at this hospital who tells the woman recovering from this horrible fall, just in a bed, to enjoy the break, enjoy the holiday away from your husband for 3 days. After all, she says, what trouble can a husband possibly get up to in 3 days? Oh, like you'd know, bitch! You're a nun! You're not married! You're either a lesbian or dedicated not to having a husband. What would you know about that? But, anyway, she finds this poppet and this sort of makeshift altar. And Lucinda has, in extremely neat writing, written "strumpet whore" on the wall. I'm sorry, I cannot keep my composure. It was just this surreal moment. Just "strumpet whore" neatly written on the wall above this poppet. And the woman tries to, take the poppet and turn it around on Lucinda and is like, "This is you!" But it gets really confused near the ending. Nothing is consistent. Why should she be able to use that poppet? It's not like she went through any ritual whatsoever. She just basically said, "This is you." That's about as much as saying, "I'm rubber and you're glue, and whatever you say bounces off me and sticks back to you." It doesn't work. It's just imaginary bullshit. Obviously what Lucinda did worked. She knows what she's doing. She's a witch. She traveled in fucking time. But then she says fire is her master's element, so the wife goes to try and drown her, and then her body vanishes, and they throw the poppet on the fire, and there's a bunch of screaming, and then it ends abruptly. So it's like, so is fire really her master's element? In which case, she should be fine. But if it's not, then drowning shouldn't have stopped her. But it did for a moment, but then her body disappeared. Like, what happened? It's exactly like the rest of Hammer House of Horror. It doesn't tell us the story we want to hear, and once we actually get any element of anything we'd want to spend more time with, it cuts it off and immediately goes to something else. There is literally nothing in the entire series that you will look at and be like, "Oh yeah, I want to see more of that." And what do? They give it to me, because they never do. It is poorly written stuff that is usually acted much better than it deserves, because a lot of these actors are really good actors. Like, for example, Patricia Quinn, who is excellent in this role of Lucinda Jessup, who would probably be played really incredibly poorly by anyone else. Overall, I would say, if you had to watch something, if you wanted to watch something of the period that still had some of that Hammer magic, as minuscule and insignificant as it is in the series, watch Hammer House of Horror, but watch only the first episode. You will really get a good idea of how terrible it is by watching that episode, because it's just got these interminable interactions between people we don't care about. And even if we care about them only because they're the protagonist or something similar to that, that doesn't really help us to become invested in the story. All it means is that we are disappointed when, inevitably, they fail, something horrible happens to them, or there is a resolution that really doesn't tell us anything about what happened, like in the case of Witching Time, which could have used at least 5 more minutes and a creepy resolution instead of a "what the hell was that? What is everybody doing? Are we supposed to believe that they just got better?" Like, what happened here? The guy was having a fucking giant major breakdown. It was arguable he couldn't even function, and we're just supposed to believe that that was okay, and Lucinda went away, because I'm pretty sure she didn't. But it would have been interesting to have that threat as the end of the episode and leave it on a very impactful moment instead of just an incoherent moment. I remember there are several other episodes in the series that absolutely infuriated me when I watched them, and I watched them with an acquaintance at the time, and we were both equally disappointed and angry at what we had seen on the screen. Like, there was one episode, I think it was called The House That Bled to Death or something, but it wasn't about a house that bled to death, even in the figurative sense. It was just an inane story about some people and some things that happened, but nothing of it was satisfying or fulfilling. And that's sort of a leitmotif for the entire series. It's not satisfying or fulfilling, and you don't really care about anything that happens. If you care about any character, it is because of the acting behind the character, not because of the character as they're written. In fact, in many ways, it reminds me of American Horror Story, in that it's incredibly poorly written, unsatisfying, and has a bad ending every time, but sometimes the good acting and the interesting ideas can make it worth watching just once to see what a terrible job they did with otherwise good ideas. In any case, it did give us I'm sorry, I cannot say that. It did give us Strumpet Whore as a slogan to believe in for our time. I would like to encourage you to use Strumpet Whore conversationally more often. I'm sorry, I can't even say that seriously. In any case, maybe watch the first episode Witching Time, because it's always nice to see Patricia Quinn in anything. But don't feel too bad if you feel obligated to skip forward through the scenes that she isn't in, because they really are incredibly boring when she's not on screen. I mean, maybe watch The Lords of Salem after that, just to get Patricia Quinn as a witch again, and have something more coherent and satisfying, which is remarkable if you've seen The Lords of Salem, because the ending sequence is not what I would generally call coherent, and not super satisfying, but compared to Hammer House of Horror, it's a brilliant masterpiece. In any case, I hope you will all have a good week. I'll see you again very soon. Be sure to bookmark my official site, which is hushjo@card.co, and there will be a link in the blurb, because I'm going to be going on a little break with one of my comics because of a lot of the shit that happened in the last month, and I need some time to just recharge and emotionally heal. So I don't know what I'll be doing at what rate, but you can always check my social media, and you can always check the links to my comics directly from my official site, so you can find out when they're updating again and when things are starting again. Because once I start that up again, it's going to be on a schedule. I'm not just going to randomly do things when I feel like them, so don't worry about that. In any case, I will look forward to seeing you next time. You're welcome. Strumpet Whore. You're welcome. Bye.